Scale and Customer Success Summit. You're currently watching Supercharge, your customer business reviews, a simplified, data-driven approach to accelerate customer engagement and results. I'm really excited to introduce our speaker here. And as I introduce him, I'm going to have him answer our icebreaker question, which I'm sure you've heard before if you've been listening to our other sessions today, which is, what would you like to scale in your personal life? So I'm here with Greg Daines, CEO at ChurnRx, and prior to being at ChurnRx, he had leadership roles at Client Velocity, InsideSales.com, and Leprikio. So, Greg, what would you like to scale in your personal life?
Good question. You probably have heard this one. It doesn't sound that unique, but I would love to scale reading. I would love to read 10 times what I read now. I'm a big reader, but honestly, the laws of physics that just have, they limit you, right?
Yeah.
So I'd love to figure out a way to make that go up by about 10x. I'd be supremely happy with that.
Yeah, no, I actually haven't heard that answer before, but that's a great one. Great. So before we start the session, just a reminder to our listeners, if you have any questions, you can post them in the chat. And if we have time at the end, we will go into a Q&A session where I can read them off. If there are any questions that we don't get to, we'll share it with our speakers after the session. And Greg can go in and post answers that we will release alongside the session recordings when the Resource Hub goes live. So Dan, I will hand it off to you. Feel free to kick us off.
All right. So I'm excited to talk about this. This topic has actually come up a lot, and the challenges around it. I'm going to focus on this, the kind of current interest in the topic of QBRs, right? And how that has become such a ubiquitous practice in customer success and what are the challenges. So I'm going to go through that as a lead in for why the solution to that is simpler than we think. So let me jump into that. We're obviously, okay, it's me, Supercharge your customer business reviews. So, okay, fair enough. What's the problem with QBRs? Why? So I actually had a colleague, former client of mine, who at his new company has been studying what's the relationship between QBRs and customer outcomes, like customer retention and things like that. And they found something that actually shocked them. I mean, I think we sort of expected it to be a weak relationship. What he didn't expect was it to be a negative relationship. So it turns out in their situation, customers with more consistent QBRs had worse retention performance. Now, I don't imagine that that's common, but what we have seen in our data, and we do a lot of research on this, is that there's really weak or no correlation between holding QBRs and customer retention. It's a really interesting thing. Why wouldn't that be the case? Surely this is our primary engagement modality with our key customer leaders, et cetera, et cetera. Well, let me go through kind of three dimensions of the problems with QBRs. And the first one has to do with what we're here really to talk about today, which is that they don't scale very well. Last year or so, there's just been this sort of reevaluation and a moment for customer success and what do we get from it, and is it worth it, and all that kind of thing. And one of the things that's sort of emblematic of the cost associated with customer success, there are many others, is this idea of a QBR. So there are really a couple things about it that are just not super scalable. And one of them is just the density of them, the preparation. So, I mean, I work with lots of companies and help them optimize their customer success. And one of the things I see is a lot of QBR decks. And a lot of companies have standardized those. And a lot of other companies, it's just sort of up to the CSM, et cetera. But it's not rare at all to see 30 or 40 slides in the standard QBR template. And the content covers just so many different topics, right? They cover current status, projects, results, relationships, key people, roles, and then they go into product roadmap and company news. I mean, just so much. The preparation for that is one of the heavyweight things that we have that limits how much we can do, how many customers we can serve, and what we can do for those customers. So that's one thing. But the other side of it is the complexity of them also relates to this challenge of getting them scheduled and having them come off at all. I mean, held rate for QBRs has been going down from the data we can see, especially over the last few years. I think there are multiple reasons for that, but at least one of the reasons for that is there's so much going on in a conventional QBR, so many people invited that the calendaring of it is just complicated. There are just that many people involved and that much, time involved, et cetera. So an hour is typical, but we also see companies that are doing 2 hours, 3 hours, on-site QBRs, et cetera. So if your QBRs are successful, good for you. They still don't scale. This is like a challenge, right? They're just really hard to scale. Like if you imagine, what if we had 10 times as many customers, which is the problem we want to have, could we scale this? And almost certainly the answer is no, we'd have to modify that. So that's one of the things. And it's only getting worse because of the pressure that's on right now to increase, to scale everything. That's what we're talking about in this conference. How do I 10x the load on every CSM? How do we grow faster? How do we do more with less? So that pressure isn't going away. And it's really amped up, especially in the last year. QBRs, as they sort of traditionally exist, the conventional approach, it's just not super scalable. Okay, that's one problem. And by the way, there's more reasons they're not scalable. I'm actually just hitting kind of the high notes here because I really want to get to what do we do instead. But I do want to talk about this because there's another problem. I consider this to be a much bigger problem, which is that the most important thing in my mind that I want from a QBR, the most important purpose for having that, is to build and maintain engagement with the key decision maker, the key sponsor at my client organization. That's extraordinarily important, and it's hard to do. So the most common complaint I get from CSMs is, how do I get back up in an account where we've fallen down, where we've lost engagement from that key sponsor? Well, it's difficult to maintain. I mean, for one thing, these are people who have lots to do, and the weight of it that we just talked about, the amount of time it takes, the amount of topics that get engaged, et cetera, all of that is making it increasingly difficult for people to get the key customer leader, key customer sponsor into this environment. In fact, even with QBR held rates going down, we're seeing an even more dramatic trend where the QBR is still being held, but the key leaders aren't showing up. And that's if I would pick one thing that's really, I think, a catastrophe around all this, it's that one. That's a bad problem. I'm sure you've experienced to some degree. You have some customers, the leaders engage, they come every time, but we're increasingly seeing that trail off. And the other thing is the companies where that's happening, where we're losing that regular engagement in our QBRs, it's hard to pick it up somewhere else. And those tend to be the customers most at risk for failure and churn. So it's almost like a litmus test. If the leader's showing up to the QBR, that's a good sign that this is the kind of customer that's not going to, churn. Well, if they're not, I don't know how to get them back. The QBR is not working, and that's a really bad sign. So it's just that kind of thing. And one of the reasons I think this is happening, and I think this is obvious to anyone, is just the success of SaaS in general, the explosion of SaaS applications. There's this study that came out from Okta called Business at Work 2024. It was really shocking. The average number of applications that companies license is over 100 applications. In many cases, it's 200. So this is a problem. Even if your customer sponsor, key leader that you're trying to engage only engages a fraction of those applications, it's still too many. I mean, they're not going to go to 10 one-hour QBRs every quarter. They're just not. I don't see that happening. If that happens, that's extraordinarily rare. So this is a problem. The model itself doesn't align with its fundamental purpose, in my view, to maintain that engagement. So that's another problem. And then here's kind of the in some ways the most disappointing part of all of it, which is, well, they're not going to work if they don't engage. And even if they do engage, and perhaps this is the reason they're not engaging, is because I don't think they're really for the key leader. If I look, and I do this all the time, every day, I'm looking at different QBR decks and seeing what people are doing. And, just so much of that content isn't really for the leader, right? So we've got project managers in the room, we've got admins, we may have, we have all these different perspectives that we think we're going to amalgamate in this experience and address all their needs. Well, for one thing, even if we addressed all their needs, most people are disengaged for most of the meeting. But the most important thing is the one I really want, that leader, is not, it's not for them. Like the content isn't the thing they want and just the thing they want. And we know about leaders, they need it to be condensed and they need to get it over with. So it's even worse than that, though. I feel like a lot of the content in QBRs isn't even about the customer. If you think about it, when we're talking about our roadmap, it's just, we shouldn't pretend that that's us talking about them, that we're giving them valuable information. Very few customers are interested in that. If there's someone in the room that's interested in that, it tends to be a very specific person with a specific problem or need, or there are lots of ways they could get that information, and there are lots of ways where we should be able to communicate that information. But it's just not super engaging to the leaders we're trying to focus on. So that's just a big problem. We shouldn't be spending any chunk of time when we have the precious attention of that customer sponsored leader, focusing on things they could have found out a number of other ways, like project updates. They could have found out by talking to their people. What's new in our product. They could have found out. There's lots of ways they could have done that. And I know that, there's a concern they don't, but I'm going to show you why that shouldn't really be our primary concern. We have some very interesting data on that. So we don't build QBRs. Typically, they're not held so that they can do the thing I want, which is not only to maintain that engagement, but for the purpose of getting customers to change. The biggest challenge we have is in engaging customers in making the changes in how they work to take advantage of the way our product produces benefits so that we have those results to rally around. So I want to talk about that for a minute too, because I do think that for a generation, for a phase of customer success's kind of rise, there was this essential fundamental assumption that things like this, highly responsive, highly communicative motions were built around driving a quality of experience. And the quality of experience was fundamentally why customers stay. They stay because they're having a good experience. Well, we have research. We need to revisit this idea because actually there are real good questions about that. So let me dive into this. The question of why customers stay. Well, we know why they stay, right? Happy customers stay and unhappy customers leave. Everybody's known that for a generation. But it actually isn't true. And this has been showing up in all sorts of different places. But to be fast, I'm going to show you our research. And our research benefits from a couple of things. One is that over the last several years, nearly every company has adopted the same satisfaction scale. Almost everybody's adopted NPS, right? It became the kind of de facto standard for how you ask about, the customer's reaction, their feelings about the experience. And so that's great. And we, at our company, ChurnRx, we do churn and retention analyses. So we've accumulated this massive benchmark database, millions and millions of records, that allows us to see in detail what are the factors that drive customers to stay. And so we asked this question. And this question came from an experience I had, which I'll share in a minute. But the question is simple. Do customers who have a better experience, who report having a higher level of satisfaction, do they stay longer? You'd expect something like this, right? Net promoter score 0 to 10. 10's really good, 0's really bad. You'd expect there to be a relationship, right, between how satisfied they say they are and how long they stay. But this is what we actually see. There's literally no correlation between how satisfied customers say they are and how long they stay. This data is from SaaS B2B data, to be fair, millions of records. This is the result we get every time we test this. This study is huge, 133,000 responses. We have massive amounts of data. When we test it for a company, we get the same response. When we test it on a different satisfaction scale, we get the same result. So this is crazy, right? And the reason I wanted to ask this question in the first place is because I'd had the following experience over and over again, which is, you have this experience where a customer's leaving, and on the way out, they tell you what a great experience it was working with you and your company. You ever had that experience? I mean, that just messes with your head. It's like, well, if you're having a good experience, why are you leaving? And I've also had the opposite experience. You probably have too, where you have a customer that's unhappy, complaining, frustrated, and but they keep renewing. And you're like, gosh darn it. what gives? How do we make sense out of this? If happy customers stay longer, why doesn't that seem to be the case? The answer is because it isn't the case. And this is something that I found out since then, that previous researchers have found going back 10, 11 years. And so this is an interesting thing. It comports with my experience. This is actually my experience, which is that unhappy customers stay sometimes and happy customers leave sometimes. There doesn't seem to be much correlation. In fact, it turns out we've studied all sorts of things. We've studied almost every factor you can think of about what correlates with customer retention. And actually, it turns out lots of things correlate with retention, like how big a company is, what country they're from, what type of business they're in, and all sorts of other things. Whether you give them a discount, whether they finish onboarding, you could almost name, and virtually every one of those has a correlation. Now, some of them, it's a weaker correlation, but it turns out there's only one factor we've ever tested that literally never correlates with customer retention, and that's satisfaction scales. So this is interesting. What the heck is going on? How are we, to understand then what drives customer retention? What the heck is it? If it's not happiness, then what is it? The answer is we found one factor that's by far and away the best predictor of customer retention. Nothing else even comes close, and that is results. Customers who get measurable results stay massively longer than customers who don't. Simple as that. Now that makes sense. Like when I think about it that way, so I had this experience where I had the worst customer I ever had was Apple, right? And I was over there all the time, Silicon Valley, dealing with them. They were endlessly unhappy, frustrated, complaining. And at one point I got frustrated. I'm ashamed to admit, I sort of felt like, okay, I've had enough. And I said to the guy, I said, hey, if you don't like us so much, why don't you just cancel? And the guy looked at me confused, like, well, why would we cancel? He said, when you get us such great results. And I remember thinking in that moment, how silly of me. Where did I come up with this idea? Why do we think it's all about this? Where do we get this idea that we're in business to make each other feel joy? The fundamental issue is results. That's the fundamental driver. And our data compellingly demonstrates that no other factor even come close, not even a combination of factors. This is the fundamental reason customers stay. So it's not that I don't care about making customers happy. Of course we should. Shame on us if we don't. But this is actually the driving dominant reason customers stay. So this has to be the priority. Well, if that's true, this is how I like to say it. Customers don't leave when they have a reason to leave. They leave when they no longer have a compelling reason to stay. It's that compelling reason to stay that ends up being the heart of my solution to the business review, because it comes from that perspective. So what is that perspective? Well, the key to engaging the key business leaders that I want to engage in, and also to making that experience scalable, is simple. Just focus on results. Let all that other stuff go. And I've been doing this for years, and it works like a charm. I'm going to walk you through my ultimate executive business review deck. That's what I call it. That's just because that's convenient. It's still a business review, but man, is it way trimmed down and stripped down from what we're normally used to, and incredibly powerful. So I want to walk through that. So there are 4 basic keys to having an effective and scalable business review. Number 1, keep the audience small. Number 2, measure and materialize. Number 3, transfer expertise. Number 4, make it quick. I'm going to go through each of these now here for a few minutes and then show you how I implement those in the simplest EBR deck I'm sure you've literally ever seen. Okay, number 1, keep the audience small. One of the things that I see all the time is, we get a meeting with the key leader and I invite everyone related to this account to come, including executives. I don't know if you've seen this, but it happens surprisingly often. Maybe I'm just inviting a few people. Either way, that's not productive. The goal is to get that person on the line and have a quick and punchy and to the point interaction around their results. And one of the things that can break it down is inviting too many people on their side, making it their project managers and their admins and their IT reps and the whatever. No, I want to identify who that person is and keep it tight. I mean, if for no other reason that doing that makes it simpler and more likely to get scheduled, but there is a better reason. There's a much better reason. And the fundamental reason is so we can have a tight, clear conversation that meets that person's needs. I'm not trying to meet multiple different perspectives. I'm not trying to address the project management problems or whatever. We're trying to get to the heart of the matter, which is, do you get the results? Are you getting the results? Let's look at that together. That's the person who owns those results. I want to have that meeting of the minds. And then if I bring too many people, same problem. There's this sense of, why are 13 people on this call? I'm being silly. Actually, I have seen that, right? Okay. So that's number one. Keep it small. Now, right here, you're probably wondering, Greg, are we ever going to have that other meeting? Do we need that other meeting where we talk about all those other topics? Yeah, my opinion is, if you need it, have it. Absolutely. There are lots of other things other people need to talk to us about, or we need to talk to them about. By all means, keep doing that. This to me is about solving the more focused problem. How do we engage the key business leader, the key sponsor, in the right kind of interaction on a regular basis, so we don't lose that engagement, so we can leverage it for change, and so we can demonstrate value. That requires a tighter relationship, and this is that more contained mode of operation, mode of interaction that works. Okay, so number one, keep the audience small. Number two, the most attractive thing, the most interesting thing to customer leaders is their results, their measured results. I've tried everything. This is the most tantalizing thing you can offer to get a leader on the phone. So you do it just for that reason. But of course, that's not the reason we do it. The reason we do it is because that's also the most important thing for us to engage on, for multiple reasons. One is, of course, we want to demonstrate value, obviously, but there's an even better reason. And that is, some of your customers are going to do really well. They arrive, they have great discipline, they do change management, they're awesome, they're off to the races, they're very mature, and it's awesome. We do our best to support those customers, and they're great, but they do not represent the majority of our customers. Most of our customers do not come with a clear understanding of how to end-to-end, how to be successful at this. And we need to essentially engage with them to help them change how they work, to take advantage of the way your solution produces benefits. Many times along the road, you've come into this moment where the person you're working with simply can't make the change. They don't have the authority. They can't buy the extra licenses. They can't do whatever. This is why, if anything, one of the most important reasons why we have to maintain that engagement with a key business leader. Their authority is critical at key moments of truth along that pathway where we need them to step in. They need to understand why it's important, how it relates to the results they're hoping to get. So that maintaining that engagement isn't just about showing value, although it's very important we do so. Some of the most valuable moments are when you show they're not getting results and talk about what they can do to overcome that. That's incredibly important. So again, keeping that focus around, and I say measure, materialize. I'm going to go into this in a little bit in a minute, but just think of it as, if you don't measure the results, they don't have the impact that we're talking about. What I said, 6x in their lifespan, that's for customers who have measured results of various levels. Okay, and I'll show you in a minute. Okay, so one of the other things I recommend here is focus on one metric. Sometimes, you have 17, you'd like to show them all. Be careful of the fire hose effect, right? We don't want them to choke on it. What I really want is for them to lock in on what's the next critical thing they need to do to get better results. I really want to focus their attention. So, okay, maybe it's not one, maybe it's two, but please be conscious. Every time you add more metrics, the more confused and diluted your message is going to be. All right. Next one, transfer expertise. This is really important. I just talked about that moment when the results are bad and I'm showing them, and the answer is, hey, look, the reason your results are not what we expected is because you guys need to do X, right? We laid out 4 things for you to do. You did 2 of them. There are 2 more left. We need to get those done. That's how you're going to get to good results. I'm using this measure and materialize moment for a really important purpose. The transferring of expertise is a simple concept. Expertise to me is just the knowledge of how the customer can get better results. It's not some deep encyclopedic knowledge of the domain. It's what's the critical factor that's blocking, that's their next opportunity for improvement. And if they're doing well, same thing. What's your next frontier? How can you get there? What's the critical thing that the successful companies do that you could do that would get you to the next level? Collecting that expertise, I consider to be a critical part of what we do in customer success. And so if I'm in a tightly focused meeting with that key business leader, they most want to see their results. They want to understand why they're good or bad, and they want to know what they can do to improve them. I've just laid out something that can be much faster. And that's the last suggestion. Make it quick. It turns out that one of the reasons key leaders and executives don't schedule for these things is they don't have time, or they don't think they do. And it's challenging, right? So I already talked about the hundreds of applications that they're, potentially interacting with, and vendors. We found that the magic words are 15 minutes. We can do this in 15 minutes. I just need 15 minutes of your time. And by the way, that's not a technique. That has to be true. We have to be sincere about that. It literally has to be done in 15 minutes. If we can't do it in 15 minutes, we have no business asking for their time. This is my belief. And it turns out it's way more effective, more likely to get them scheduled for these meetings if we can promise this and keep our promise. Now, very frequently they'll schedule 30, and maybe it'll take 30, but you have to start with a sincere offer. And one of the things that happens when you make an offer, when you say, I only need 15 minutes, is that you're signaling that you aren't going to wander off into topics they're not interested in. You're not going to waste their time. And when they get on with you and discover that you keep that promise, that you keep it tight, it builds trust. It shows them that you literally are sincere, and you're going to, respect their time and keep it to this focus and make sure that it's adding value to them. So it's just critical part of this. Now, this is also part of what makes this scalable, because I talked about how heavy they are, how much prep time there is. I'm going to show you that this thing should not only not take more than 15 minutes, it should take not more than a few minutes to prep for it. That's not because that's what I want. It turns out fundamentally, it's because that's what they want. They want that kind of a tight, focused engagement that's focused around the thing they most want. So if you can deliver on that, you've built a much more scalable piece of the customer success practice that I think is really important. Can it be done digitally? Of course. And I'll show you in a minute how. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about what I mean by measure and materialize, because that's actually the focus of what I think you do in the EBR, what's most important, what's most interesting. Okay, so I'm going to show you what our data says about how important it is to measure results, not just talk about them and not just kind of talk about value and ask customers if they got value, but to agree with a customer, here's the metric of success, and I'm going to measure it, and I'm going to show it to you every single time we meet. Okay, so our data shows that, right, if you look at the average lifespan of customers who have not been measuring their results, there's an average. It doesn't matter what it is. It's, but it's not long, frankly. It's kind of sad. When you go to customers and you measure their results, it goes up by a multiple. Now, initially, that multiple, the lowest version of it is, well, what if I show them bad results? One of the big concerns people have about doing this is I don't know if I want to commit to showing them their results every month or every quarter or whatever, because what if they're bad? And frankly, I know they're bad for a lot of my clients, right? So I don't know if I want to do that. Well, it turns out the data is very compelling on this. If you show customers their results and they're terrible, those customers already stay twice as long now as customers who didn't have measured results. So even when you're showing terrible results, they're not getting the results they want. You think, well, they're just going to leave us. No, they don't. And by the way, you may wonder, why don't they leave us? Turns out they actually, we interview these customers all the time. We've studied them at some depth, and actually they're very interesting, because what they say is, well, why would I leave you? You're measuring the results. You're working with me. I'm more likely to get there with you than going to some competitor who's not even going to measure my results. So actually they have a very sophisticated way of thinking about it, and I think it's very, I think it's true, right? Okay, so you already get a bump to show customers a 2x increase in lifespan if you show customers they're getting bad results. So do not be afraid to get on the phone with a business leader and say, here's your results, they're not good. Here's why, and here's what you can do about it. Powerful moment. But if they have even modest results, that goes up to now 4x. We've quadrupled the lifespan. Now stop and just think about this. Most of the clients I work with want to bring their churn down, right? These are companies that want much less churn. We can already cut their churn in half if all they do is show customers results and they're all terrible, but they're not all terrible. What actually happens is a lot of them have good results. Those customers, 4x lifespan, 4 times longer lifespan, whatever it was before. Really incredible. What if they got excellent results? It goes up another factor of 2. So it's like doubling the lifespan. It's exponential increase. Measuring results is incredibly powerful. Remember that in that not measuring group, there are probably a lot of customers who are getting results. The not measuring of is the disaster here. We need to start building companies where we fundamentally commit to driving, measuring, and materializing every customer's results. Okay, so let's jump into this. We don't, though, by the way, and I won't dwell on this, but most of the things we measure aren't really their results. They're our results, like retention and satisfaction. That's about us. That's not what they get. That's what we get out of the relationship. Okay, so that's why I say, hey, look, here's a simple policy. You don't have to measure every customer's results, just the ones you want to keep. Okay, I think you get the point. Let's go on. So what is materializing? Materializing is, well, it's not enough, obviously, for them to get results. They have to see that. They have to actually engage with it and perceive that there's a metric and that it's improving or that it's going somewhere. Materializing is really valuable, though. It's not just about showing it to them, right? It's not, oh, they have a report engine, they can go look at it. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about engaging around, this is your metric of success. Here's how it is. And materializing, a big part of that is helping them by showing them how they could make it better. So we're not just showing it like it's a spike the football moment. No, this is all about engaging around how to understand it correctly and get it to go higher. That's incredibly, like, that's the fundamental thing that I call, that creates what I call customer bonding. Okay. All right. It's critical to materialize for a couple of reasons. And one of them is customers don't improve unless they're tracking their results. It's just, you just don't, right? Unless it's this famous quote from Peter Drucker, you can't improve what you don't measure. That's a real thing. Like, the idea that you could consistently improve something without having visibility onto it, just not real. But the other reason is those results don't lead to improvement unless we can show what they can do to improve them. That expertise that I keep talking about is a critical part of this whole formula. And it's why there's really just 3 things in the EBR formula. Now, before I go on, I want to make sure that one of the biggest mistakes people make in these things is that they think it's all about taking credit. We want to show them that we caused this benefit, that they got the result because of us. It turns out, I know that's tempting. I do, but you can relax a little bit, because it turns out it doesn't matter whether they give you credit or not. Our data shows once they engage with the metrics, their lifespan improves and they do much better. You don't need to stop and say, well, I need you to give me credit and I need to pass you off to marketing so this can become a marketing story. If they don't, some customers want to do that, but a lot of customers will really bristle if you try to make this about you. These are not our results, these are their results. And the more sincere we are about engaging on that level, the more effective these business reviews will be. So let me show you my executive business review. I'm going to move in super fast. I want to spend a little time on this, partly because I think what you're going to be shocked about is how simple it is. So let's just start with a purpose. I want to maintain alignment with that key decision maker. That's critical. Losing that engagement, everybody knows, is a huge risk factor, and for good reason. I want to ensure that they understand their results and what's driving them, whether they're good or bad. What are the key factors, what they can do to improve those. That's critical for them to connect on that. They maybe don't need to know every possible detail about the projects and why there was a delay and whatever. Maybe they are interested in that, but a lot of leaders are not. And the most important thing they really want to understand is, how is this doing against the objectives we set for it? And then there's that key moment, and it just seems like it happens constantly. It doesn't seem that rare to me, in my experience, when I have to go to that key leader and say, hey, look, there's a blockage and I need your authority to unblock that, or we're not going to make progress. You need to buy the new licenses, or tell this person to change the process, or alter the way the incentives work, or whatever it is. I need them to be part of this. And if I'm not maintaining this kind of an engagement focused around this way of thinking, then I'm not going to have that opportunity to leverage them. So that's such an important part of it. Okay, here we are. We've come to the moment where I'm going to show you my ultimate EBR deck. Don't be tempted to be deflated. The simpler this is, in my opinion, the more powerful, and certainly the more scalable. So it really comes down to 3 slides. I actually literally, with my clients, we implement a 3-slide executive business review. Remember, it's just for that person. It's just focused around results and expertise. And so this is what you'll see. What's the first slide? The first slide is actually just the restatement of what our goal was. What is the business objective that we agreed on? This one I don't draft for every EBR. This was we started with this. Now, I haven't covered it in this, but some of you who follow my content know I talk a lot about this thing I call a customer results strategy. What is it? It's like a hyper condensed success plan. Success plans are great. The condensed one is really valuable because it's more scalable. It's another part of this that, you know, I've a lot of people I think have had this experience where some customers engage in your success plan and they fill it out and everything's great, but so many others don't. They're too long, they're too complicated, but even worse, a lot of customers don't really know the answer. If you ask them, you know, what are they trying to achieve? They'll tell you, install your software, right? Do this thing. They don't really know how to connect what they're doing to the business results and how that'll be measured. So this method isn't just a more condensed way of building a success plan. It's also a more proactive way. It's a more prescriptive way. It's a more teaching oriented way where I lead customers, many of whom don't really know yet the right way to think about success with our product or company. And I show them how to do that. And then we end up with something that's hyper condensed. So if you're interested in that, I'm going to give a link at the end of this here in a minute where you can go download the guide for this. And you can also, you know, get in touch with me and ask me how we do it. But this is a really big part of it. This is no prep. We did this. I want to do this at least once a year with a client. So all I'm doing is pasting this in here. That's the first slide, zero prep. We already did this. It's just a quick review. What's the second slide? The most important one, measure and materialize. Remember I said best to focus on one metric? Okay, maybe there's two. Fair enough. You think it through. But I want to be very focused here. And I have had the best success with executives saying, look, there are a lot of other ways to look at this, but this is the key metric we're looking at to see how you're doing. And here's how you're doing, right? Now, the other thing you do here, that's the measure part. The materialize part is really about why are these results? So if they're phenomenal, why? Well, you guys made those two changes that unlocked all the benefits and now we're roaring. But, you know, I'll tell you in a minute how you can do even more or a new thing, whatever. Or maybe the results are bad. Here's the reason they've stalled. You know, we were making this change and we ran into this obstacle and we've been stuck there. We couldn't get the data or we, you know, the whatever the limitation is. It's not just about showing the results. It's about getting the value out of showing the results by explaining why, because that's what points me and points my customer toward the way through. What's the way to better, right? And we always need better. It turns out customers don't renew because of what you achieve. They renew because of what you're going to achieve. They're forward looking. So no matter what, this is my way to demonstrate here's where we've come to, here's why, and here's what's next, right? And that's what that third slide is, fundamentally. And simple. If this looks simple and you're just going, wow, could it be that simple? Yes, please. I don't like anything else on these because you know what? Executives don't like anything else on these. They want to engage as purely and unadorned, right? With the unvarnished truth as they possibly can, good or bad. This is the most effective way to build that trust and bonding that I keep talking about. And that last piece is show them what they can do to improve. Don't have 20 points on here. Even 2 is optional. If it's appropriate and fits the situation, tell them the one thing that you want her or him to go away with clearly saying, that's something we can do. Let's go get that done, right? You've made your case. This is why it can be 15 minutes. You were wondering, how could it be like that? Because there's really only this to focus on with that person. Now, I said, if you need to keep those other meetings because they actually serve a lot of really valuable purposes, of course. If you want to keep calling them a QBR, that's fine too. I don't even mind. But I would focus from the beginning on why QBRs fail at the thing I consider to be the most important function that they have, which is that engagement with a leader and then leveraging their authority into driving further change and making them aware of how to do that. That's why I keep this so tight. And because it's like this, 2 things happen. It's short, it's punchy, it's targeted purely at them. They're much more likely to get on. So when we implement this, we regularly see uptake rates, held rates for these meetings to go up massively higher than what they were getting with their executive engagement prior, like 3 or 4 times. I mean, someone told me last week they had 9 out of 10 not attending, and they had 10 out of 10 attending after they switched to this approach. I think that's really important, you know, way of thinking about this is a fundamentally different paradigm in a sense for engaging them. And you can see how their perspective, having been through it, they'll start to see you're deadly sincere. You're not going to pump them for more money and you're not going to try to, you know, show off the new, No, this is exclusively about their results, and you're very sincere about that. It's really powerful in changing the dynamic there. Okay, so that's my method. I've shown this. We've taught this to hundreds of CSMs. It's amazing to see people's reaction to this. But one of the things that we commonly get as a kind of comment is, well, that, yes, measuring customer results is kind of a new job. That's a thing we aren't doing. Other than that, this thing is extraordinarily lightweight to put together and execute. That's partly why the scalability thing is just so powerful here. All right, I'm gonna roughly stop there. I want to make sure we have some time for some questions. I will put up, well, I'll leave this on the screen for a minute, but don't worry, in a minute I'll also put up that link to download the customer results strategy and other things. So, all right, okay, time for questions. Are we back? Okay, yes, here we go.
Yeah, this session has been great. I think everyone, myself and everyone in the chat and everyone else has loved it. Just jumping into the questions because we really only have 4 minutes here. What is the typical frequency that you hold your EBR for a?
Yeah, great question. It turns out it can vary about as much as you think it should. So there are customers who need it and want it monthly. More than that, I don't know. Executives are, like I said, they don't have endless amount of time, but they do tend to start to like it when they see it. So we have seen that. I think a common one is quarterly. That's funny to say because I was just trashing a quarterly business review, but you can see what I mean is a different thing. But also I've seen it be very effective for higher volume programs, smaller accounts, et cetera, to be twice a year. I think less than twice a year is even possible. I said you could do this digitally. One of the things that I strongly recommend is when you reach out to your executive to schedule it, include the deck. Don't make him or her wait till the meeting. Send it. You'll increase the likelihood they'll get on the phone if they see it first, not decrease. I know that seems counterintuitive. It turns out it makes them more interested to hear what you have to say. But that means you could also do this digitally. If you create something like this is something I've seen companies, we've worked with them to implement, where this goes out monthly in an email, or quarterly or biannually in an email. So it's totally doable digitally as well.
Yeah, and I love that it's so simple and quick in 15 minutes. Like having a EBR every month sounds like a nightmare to me, but if we had a 15-minute EBRs, then like easy, definitely manageable. Question is, how do you approach transfers of expertise when your main QBR stakeholders already see themselves as the expert and don't seem to be open to outside consultation?
Yeah, we see this all the time. So I have a great story on this. We had a client that was working with dentists, and a common response was, "Don't tell me how to be a dentist. I know what I'm doing." So we taught them this little script. We'd say, "Oh no!" And actually, I sat with this young woman who was new. This was like her first job out of college, so she was terrified. And these guys are grumpy. But she told the script. I was live on the call, and she said, "Oh no, I know, sir. You know more about dentistry than I'll ever know, but we know more about this. And let me tell you, the clients that we have that do the best follow this practice." And you know what he said? "Oh, okay." Well, people like money, right? So yeah. Anyway, we do have to establish that our expertise is in the domain that we're advising them on. And sometimes even that feels a little intrusive. We need to be bold and declare, we know this will make you get better results. So please consider it.
Yeah, definitely. Next question is suggestions on getting beyond your current contact to your boss, the sponsor, when your contact feels that they can relay information or meet often with the sponsor. I get this one a lot.
It's very common to
hear you have to say about it.
Yeah, it's very common to send this out and have the person you're working with say, "I don't know if this is for me," right? I'm more about the, getting the work done or whatever. Well, that's really common, right? Because it's very common for us to, a sense, lost contact with that person. But sending this to our contact frequently surfaces that, and I'll say, "Well, who do you think cares about it? This chart, who cares about that it's going up or down?" "Well, I can tell you that's our VP of whatever." So it starts that conversation. We need to do the hard work to get back up. And this actually turns out to be a really good excuse to engage in that process. "Hey, could you send it to them? Could you give me their email? Could I, and could you introduce me?" Whatever. We have to go through that process. We have to get back up. And this turns out to be a really good excuse for doing that.
Yeah. And then how do you decide which metrics to focus on when you're like picking your one metric?
The most important thing is to have done that with the customer. So we didn't cover that in this session, but creating that customer results strategy, really important. I have a lot to say about that, and I've done other things. And again, let me go on to the download so you guys can pull this up. Go get this guide, and then also reach out to me if you have questions about it. I'm gonna be publishing a self-guided training on this. It's really important that you find a few minutes to link up with this person and get on the same page as to what is going to be our key metric. And if we're going to do two, what are those two going to be? We just have to agree on that. What doesn't work is to come back later and say, hey, I found some value we achieved. Aren't you proud of me? My experience is customers say, they have to own it. It has to be, it has to feel like the thing they care about, right?
Yeah, definitely. And with that, we are at time, unfortunately. Any questions that we weren't able to get to, we'll be passing along to Greg, who will answer them along, and we will pass out those answers along with the recording of the session in our resource hub. So you guys will get notified about that when it goes live. And I just want to say, Greg, the session is so amazing. Thanks again for being our speaker, and to everyone on the call, thanks again for attending.
My pleasure. It was great doing it. See you guys.
Yeah.